All right, let's dive in. We're taking a look at some intriguing ideas from Carl Jung today.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah, and we're zeroing in on something called the transcendent function.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned you're interested in self-improvement, right?
Right.
Figuring out those things that might be holding you back.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Jung was all about what's happening beneath the surface
Mm.
in the unconscious mind
Mm.
and how that can really mess with us
Yeah.
or, push us forward.
Interesting.
And what's so cool about Jung, he wasn't just some, armchair philosopher.
Right.
This guy, he was a psychiatrist,
A clinician.
right? Working with real people, dealing with real problems.
Exactly. He saw the impact of all this firsthand.
Yeah, and that's what really drew me to this deep dive, this whole idea that there are these like hidden forces at work shaping our lives.
Absolutely. And we're often completely unaware of them.
Right. And we actually found this YouTube video that sums up Jung's ideas pretty well.
Up.
And it talks about this tension between the conscious and unconscious minds.
It's a constant battle.
It is so. Can you break that down for us? Like, what does that actually mean for someone trying to, live their life, make decisions, just understand their own behavior?
It's like this. Imagine an iceberg, okay?
Okay.
The tip, the part you see above water, that's your conscious mind, what you're aware of right now.
Got it.
But then there's this massive chunk underneath, the unconscious.
Right, right.
All these memories, instincts, experiences you might not even remember, but they're still driving you.
Wow.
In ways you don't even realize.
So this unconscious, this hidden part of the iceberg, it's powerful stuff.
Oh, incredibly powerful.
What happens when we try to just ignore it?
Well, the YouTube video mentioned that it can lead to problems, right?
Yeah.
It's a big deal. The unconscious doesn't just disappear if we pretend it's not there. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can only push it down for so long.
It's going to pop.
Exactly. And Jung saw this with his patients. Suppressing the unconscious, it can manifest in all sorts of ways.
Like what?
Slips of the tongue,
Okay.
recurring dreams, even finding yourself in the same bad relationships over and over again,
Yeah.
or repeating the same self-sabotaging behaviors.
It's like you're stuck in a loop.
You are. It's like a broken record.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. I've definitely had times where I felt like totally out of control of my emotions, angry, anxious, or just stuck in a rut, and I couldn't figure out why. Are you saying those could be signs of the unconscious, like trying to break through?
Absolutely. And it ties into another crucial point Jung makes. When we hyper-focus on our conscious goals, which is obviously important to achieve things,
Sure.
it can cause us to neglect other parts of ourselves.
Like we're only seeing part of the picture.
Exactly. It's like shining a spotlight on one tiny area while the rest of the room stays dark. And that can actually give the unconscious even more power, like we're pushing it down further and further.
So we're not supposed to ignore it. We're not supposed to conquer it.
Right.
So then how do we deal with it?
That's where the transcendent function comes in.
Okay, so this transcendent function, this is like what, a bridge between those two parts of ourselves.
Exactly. It's a way to bring the hidden stuff into the light, to understand it, to integrate it, to become more whole.
Okay, that sounds amazing in theory,
Sure.
but how do we actually do that?
Well, Jung had a bunch of methods, practical ways to approach this.
Like what? If I'm not having, crazy vivid dreams every night,
Yeah.
how can I even begin to tap into this unconscious realm?
Well, for example, he said to pay attention to those little slips of the tongue.
Oh, interesting.
They often reveal a lot more than we realize.
Like Freudian slips.
Kind of, but Jung took it further. He saw them as clues from the unconscious.
So it's not just about dreams then?
No, not at all. He was a big fan of creative expression, too.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He'd encourage people to draw, paint, sculpt, anything to get those creative juices flowing.
And that helps us connect with the unconscious.
The idea is to let the unconscious express itself freely, without judgment.
Like we're giving it a voice.
Exactly. And journaling is another great tool. Just write down whatever's going on in your head, especially those recurring thoughts and feelings.
So like if you're noticing a pattern.
Exactly. Pay attention to those patterns. Ask yourself what they're trying to tell you. It's all about listening to the whispers of the unconscious, the subtle ways it's trying to communicate.
So we're paying attention to our dreams. We're watching out for those slips of the tongue. We're exploring those creative outlets. We're journaling.
Yeah.
It's like we're learning a whole new language, the language of the unconscious.
I love that analogy. The more we pay attention, the better we understand what the unconscious is trying to tell us.
And once we understand, then we can start integrating these hidden parts into our lives.
That's right. And that's the heart of the transcendent function.
We're not just uncovering these hidden parts of ourselves.
Yep.
We're actually incorporating them.
Integrating them, making them part of who we are.
How does that even work? How do we
Yeah.
take this, deep, mysterious, unconscious stuff and use it to make positive changes?
Well, it's about finding a balance,
Mm,
a kind of negotiation between the conscious and the unconscious. You're
mm,
not trying to silence the unconscious,
right.
but you're trying to understand its needs and figure out how to meet them in a healthy way.
And this is where it gets really interesting to me.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of work,
It can be.
but is it worth it?
Oh, absolutely. Here's the thing. The unconscious, yeah, it can seem scary,
Yeah.
oh, overwhelming at times,
Right.
but it's also incredibly powerful. It's the source of our creativity, our intuition, even our deepest desires.
Okay.
By tapping into it, we unlock a whole new level of self-understanding, and that leads to growth.
So it's not about conquering the unconscious. It's not about controlling it. It's more like collaborating,
Yeah,
learning from it, working with it, and ultimately becoming a more complete version of ourselves.
exactly. It's a lifelong journey. But the transcendent function, that's your compass, that's your guide.
It's like a map to a whole world inside of ourselves, and the things we can discover there could be life-changing.
Absolutely. And everyone's journey is unique. There's no one right way to do this.
That's reassuring.
The key is to be open, to be curious, and to be patient with yourself.
I love that. So before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from all of this so far?
I'd say this. Don't be afraid of the unconscious. It's not
Yeah.
some monster in the closet.
Why?
It's a part of you. And it has gifts to offer, valuable insights.
That's a good way to put it.
Start paying attention to it. See what it's trying to tell you. You might be surprised by what you learn.
That's great advice. And we'll be back in the next part of our deep dive to explore even more of Jung's insights on the transcendent function and how to use it to live more fulfilling lives. So until then, keep those inner voices talking.
And listening.
Absolutely. Okay, we're back and ready to go deeper into the world of Carl Jung and the transcendent function.
That's right, deeper into the rabbit hole.
Exactly. And, in the last part, we talked about how powerful the unconscious is and a few ways to start listening to those messages.
Uh-huh.
It's really amazing to think that there's this whole other, system operating beneath the surface, influencing our thoughts, our actions, everything.
Like an iceberg, remember?
Right, exactly, like an iceberg. And like any complex system, the unconscious has its own logic,
Right, its own language.
its own agenda
It
even.
does. And sometimes it's not a pretty one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. We talked about how important it is to integrate the shadow side, to bring those unconscious patterns into awareness.
Yeah.
But what happens when that process gets messy?
Mm.
When we try to listen, but we keep running into a wall, like there's some kind of resistance?
Oh, that happens all the time.
It does.
Yeah, it's super common. Jung actually talked about this, how the ego, our conscious sense of self can feel threatened by the unconscious.
Okay, yeah.
It's like the ego wants to be in charge,
Right.
and then all these unconscious urges and desires, they come bubbling up, and it's like a challenge to its authority.
Like a power struggle within ourselves.
Exactly, and that can be scary,
Yeah, really scary, like losing control.
Exactly, like these unconscious forces are going to take over.
That's why Jung emphasized that the ego needs to hold its ground.
Right.
It's not about letting the unconscious run wild.
No, it's about finding a balance, having a conversation where both sides can be heard.
But how do you have a conversation with something that feels so intangible and mysterious?
Well, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, unconscious, what's up?
Uh-huh.
But you're on the right track. Jung developed some pretty cool techniques to facilitate this dialogue. One he called active imagination.
Okay, that sounds kind of out there to me.
It can sound a little woo-woo at first, I know, but it's actually very practical. It involves really engaging with our fantasies, our inner images, almost like purposeful daydreaming.
So instead of just letting our minds wander, we're actively participating in the fantasy.
Exactly. You might picture a character, a scene, even a whole dialogue with a figure from your unconscious.
Like you're bringing it to life.
In a way, yeah. You're creating a safe space for these unconscious contents to express themselves, often symbolically.
Interesting. So it's like we're giving the unconscious a stage to perform on, and by watching the performance, we can start to get a sense of what it's trying to tell us.
You got it. The key is to pay attention to what emerges, the symbols, the emotions, the messages behind it all. It's kind of like figuring out a dream, but you're awake and consciously creating the images.
We heard in that YouTube video that Jung also recommended things like art and writing, To connect with the unconscious, is that similar to active imagination?
They're definitely related. It's all about finding a way to give the unconscious a voice. Whether you're painting, sculpting, writing a poem, dancing, whatever, it's all connected.
It all taps into those deeper parts of ourselves. It's like you're bypassing the censor of the conscious mind and letting the unconscious speak directly.
I love that. It's not just about analyzing our problems, it's about using creative energy to transform them.
Right, to take those raw unconscious materials and create something new and meaningful.
Mm.
And don't forget, this creative process isn't just about expressing yourself. It's about integration.
Mm.
As you interact with these unconscious contents, you're shaping them, you're working with them, and ultimately you're integrating them into your personality.
So like taking those random puzzle pieces from the unconscious and figuring out where they fit into the bigger picture of ourselves.
Exactly. And the more you do that, the more whole and balanced you become, and the better you can handle all those curveballs life throws at you.
It sounds almost like a form of alchemy, like we're taking this raw, messy stuff from the unconscious and transforming it into something precious.
I like that alchemy of the soul. But is this integration always a good thing? What if those unconscious contents, what if they're really dark, really disturbing?
That's where things can get tricky, and honestly, that's often why having a guide, like a therapist trained in Jungian psychology, can be so valuable.
So we don't have to do this alone.
It can be really helpful to have someone who can hold space for you, help you explore those darker parts safely, and integrate them in a healthy way.
So it's not about pretending the dark stuff isn't there.
Right.
It's not about trying to shove it back down.
No, it's about facing it, but with compassion and understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to be clear, the unconscious isn't inherently bad or destructive. It's just another part of who we are, with its own light and shadow.
Exactly. And by embracing both, we become more whole and complete.
All of this is so fascinating, but I have to admit, it can feel a bit overwhelming. Like, where do I even begin?
It's natural to feel overwhelmed. The key is to start small, to be patient with yourself, and remember, this is a lifelong journey.
Okay, so no need to rush.
Exactly. It's not about having all the answers right away. It's about being curious, being willing to explore your inner world.
And having support along the way.
Exactly. A good therapist can be like a guide, helping you navigate the terrain, understand the language of the unconscious, work through any resistance.
Like a Sherpa for the soul, helping us climb those inner mountains.
Love that. And just like climbing a mountain, yeah, the journey can be tough, but the view from the top is amazing.
Speaking of amazing views, Jung also talked about how the unconscious isn't just personal, it's collective too.
That's right. One of his most mind-blowing ideas.
So there's more to the unconscious than just our own individual experiences.
Jung believed that the unconscious contains what he called archetypes.
Okay.
These are universal patterns of experience that we all share that connect us to all of humanity.
So like a shared reservoir of human experience, a collective unconscious.
Exactly. It's like there's this deep well of stories, myths, symbols that have resonated with people for centuries.
Wow, that's pretty incredible to think about.
It is. By exploring our own unconscious, we're actually tapping into something much larger than ourselves.
It makes you realize we're not just isolated individuals, we're part of this vast, interconnected web of human experience.
Exactly, and that realization can be so empowering.
How so?
It can help us find meaning and purpose in our lives, and it can inspire us to make a difference in the world.
I love that. Okay, this feels like a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this part, from those feelings of resistance to the idea of a collective unconscious.
We've talked about active imagination, creative expression, the value of therapy, and even our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And in the next part, we'll explore some practical tips for actually working with the transcendent function and applying all these insights to our everyday lives. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on Jung's transcendent function.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. Exploring this hidden world of the unconscious.
Right, and how it all ties into our conscious minds.
Exactly. It's almost like we have this powerful force inside us,
Hmm.
capable of amazing things,
Yeah,
but also, capable of some not so great things.
it's true.
And most of the time, we're clueless about it.
We're on autopilot,
Totally.
reacting to things based on old patterns and beliefs.
Right. And sometimes those patterns, they just don't work for us anymore.
Exactly.
So we talked about bringing those unconscious patterns into the light, right? Integrating that shadow side with the light.
Yeah.
But now, I want to get practical.
Okay.
What can our listeners actually do, starting today, to put these ideas into action?
Well, we touched on a few things already. Journaling, creative expression, working with a therapist.
Right.
But one of the most powerful things Jung recommended is paying attention to your dreams.
We talked about dreams a bit earlier,
Yeah,
but I think it's worth another look.
I agree.
A lot of people think dreams are just random nonsense, but you're saying there's real value in them?
Absolutely. Jung saw dreams as a direct line to the unconscious. They can show us our deepest fears, our desires, even our potential. They can reveal those shadow parts of ourselves, the parts we might be hiding from.
Okay, but how do you actually decode those nighttime messages?
Mm-hmm.
I don't speak dream symbolism.
You don't need to be an expert. Dream dictionaries can be helpful sometimes,
Okay.
but the most important thing is to develop your own personal understanding of your dream symbols. It's not about finding the one right interpretation.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about noticing how the dream makes you feel, the images that stick out, the emotions they evoke.
So more about personal interpretation than looking for some universal meaning.
Exactly. Keep a dream journal by your bed. As soon as you wake up, write down everything you remember, even if it seems like gibberish at first. Then, really think about it. What feelings come up? Do the images connect to anything going on in your waking life? Dreams are like puzzles. Sometimes it takes some work to figure them out.
I like that. Dreams as puzzles. It makes them seem less scary, more like a fun challenge.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
What about those times when we feel stuck, like we're hitting a wall in our growth? Can the transcendent function help with that?
Absolutely. Jung believed that feeling stuck often means there's a conflict.
The conflict.
Yeah, between our conscious desires and our unconscious needs. Those two parts of ourselves are pulling in different directions.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we understand what the unconscious is trying to tell us?
Active imagination can be really useful for this.
Oh, okay, right. We talked about that earlier.
It's about consciously engaging with that conflict.
So like having a dialogue with the part of yourself that's keeping you stuck.
Exactly. Let's say you're feeling trapped in a dead-end job. You consciously know you want to quit, but something is holding you back.
Fear.
Could be something else. With active imagination, you might imagine a conversation with a figure that represents that resistance.
So like sitting down with my inner couch potato and saying, what's the deal?
Exactly. You could ask, what are you so afraid of? Or, what are you trying to protect me from?
Interesting.
By having this dialogue, you can uncover those unconscious beliefs that are keeping you stuck, like fear of failure or this deep need for security that your job is fulfilling, even though it makes you miserable.
It's like those fears have a chance to explain themselves.
Yeah, and when you understand them better, they lose their power over you.
That makes sense. We can start making more conscious choices.
Exactly.
So we don't see those fears as the enemy, but as parts of ourselves that are trying to help, even if they're going about it the wrong way.
They're just trying to protect us, even if their methods are a bit outdated.
This whole process sounds like a lot of inner work.
Yes.
And I know that can be daunting for some people.
Sure.
Is there anything we can do externally, to support this integration? Are there any activities, practices, anything like that?
Jung was a big advocate for having a creative outlet,
Okay.
whether it's painting, writing, dancing, playing music, whatever speaks to you.
And that helps.
The act of creating allows the unconscious to express itself in a tangible way.
It's like those unconscious energies have a way to come out.
Yeah, to become visible in the world.
I think some people might say, oh, but I'm not creative.
It's not about being a master artist. It's about the process, the playfulness, the experimentation.
Right.
Let go of judgment, let go of control. Allow yourself to be messy, to make mistakes, to see what happens.
So even just doodling in a notebook or free writing in a journal, that counts.
Absolutely. It's all about creating space for the unconscious to emerge and communicate with the conscious mind. You might be amazed by what comes out.
Wow, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for self-discovery.
That's great to hear.
So before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for our listeners? What's the most important thing to remember about this whole transcendent function thing?
Remember that the transcendent function isn't a one-time fix, it's an ongoing process.
Okay.
A lifelong journey of becoming more whole, more integrated, more aligned with your true self.
It's like this spiral, always evolving as we integrate more and more of ourselves.
Exactly. And as we embrace that journey, we open ourselves up to so much possibility.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a real pleasure exploring the depths of Jungian psychology with you.
It's been my pleasure as well. I hope our listeners feel inspired to start their own journeys of self-discovery.
And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening to that inner voice. Until next time on The Deep Dive.